In this video, I'll discuss post-battle maintenance. Post-battle maintenance is important to do to keep your boat functioning reliably, also to make incremental improvements and prolong longevity of the components that go with the boat to ultimately make more efficient use of your money. Several things that I'll do for post-battle maintenance. These have been successful for preserving a lot of my boats, so I'll cover them in this video. One of the first things to do after battle, back home, is consider whether or not to rinse out the boat. So reasons to rinse out the boat would be if there's copper sulfate in the pond water. So copper sulfate's used in some ponds to inhibit weed growth, which is good for battles. The fact of not having weeds is a plus for battles, but the problem is it can corrode electronics. So if I've battled in a pond with copper sulfate, I'll rinse out the boat. Another reason could be if the water in the pond that you battled in is very smelly, then it can just be more pleasant to rinse out the boat. So I'm not really going to show that, but the way I would typically do it is, take the superstructure off, take the decks off, or the deck pieces, and then just fill the entire hull with a hose out in the yard, and flush at least probably 2 ship volumes through, and then that just helps keep things clear. It helps remove muck and any sludge in the boat. I'll do that first because it's going to get everything wet, so I want to be done with the steps getting the boat wet before I move on to the steps to dry out components. Another thing you can do if there's copper sulfate is, if you really want to be prudent or cautious, is you could disconnect all your electronic connections, so all these plugs, and then clean the contacts. So you can see there's a tiny bit of corrosion at the base of those contacts. You can see the green right there. So you can clean that with an electrical cleaner that you can get from big box store, or something like Corrosion X is also good. So here are a few of those products. Here's Corrosion X. Might be able to find it at a location, but nowadays I'd really just find it online to make sure it's there. This works great for connectors that already have corrosion. A lot of times servo leads will have corrosion, which is basically, it'll just look green. And really, just kind of spray it on the connection and then try to brush or rub it off with a paper towel or some sort of stiff bristled brush, or saw someone recently use a toothbrush, which is a really good idea, an old toothbrush. You can also use electrical contact cleaner. This is just get a big box home improvement store or Ace Hardware. It helps clean, but Corrosion X is what I kind of prefer. And then once it's cleaned off, then you can use dielectric grease. Get this at Home Depot, Lowe's, etc. And then what this does is, after it's clean, if you just put some of that in the connection, in the plugs, before you plug them back together, that'll it basically kind of creates a film over the connectors or the connection surfaces, the electrical contacts, and will help prevent or minimize corrosion. For the guns, it's important to make sure they're empty, especially if you sank in the last battle of the event you're at. So this is something I'll typically do pondside after either removing the boat from the water or if it sank after recovering it, and basically just cycle the guns, shoot a lot of CO2 through the guns until you're sure that there's no BBs. You can also pick up the deck or whatever they're associated, how they're attached, and if you move them around, if there's BBs in the magazines, if there's a lot of BBs, you'll hear them roll back and forth. But it's just important to know if you have magnets that like up to 5 or 6 BBs at the T there won't roll. So you just want to remember if you had issues with the gun feeding or something to make sure there's no BB stuck in there. In one situation, I had a gun that I didn't use in every battle, and I loaded it at some point and forgot to empty it, and I let it sit in the boat for several months, and then the BBs had rusted so badly that I actually couldn't empty the magazine after identifying the problem. The corrosion was too significant that I couldn't even get the BBs out, and I had to replace the magazine. So something that's good to do. Another thing I'll do sometimes is I usually decrease the tweak a little bit on the guns, so I'll loosen the nuts here about a quarter to a half turn. Honestly, I don't really know if that's required. I know some people don't do it, and it works fine. But something you can do if you desire. Okay, usually the next thing I'll do if I have to rinse the boat out after that is to dry the boat. So typically I'll incline it, either prop up the bow or stern as desired, and then that'll make residual water kind of pool. So you can see there's a bit of water in there, and then I use either a turkey baster or a smaller little syringe to remove the water. So this I think I got from dental work at some point, but it actually works pretty well to remove the water. Just kind of like that. Because the turkey baster, I'll use that first, but this is good for smaller volumes. And remove the water just to really get the bulk of the water out, and then I'll either leave the boat out in the sun if it's a nice day, or I'll set up fans to help dry the boat out. So here I have a small fan, so I usually set it up, and then on a big boat like the Iowa class here, I'll reposition it several times, but usually I'll focus on the motors and electronics first to get those dry, and then I'll move to the other portions. You can see, like, even on the solenoids here, right, there's moisture. So something that's ferrous can rust, so it's just good to dry it out. One thing that you can consider is if you're going to resheet the boat, the balsa actually comes off easier if the boat is still wet. So especially something like the Missouri here, that's basically too large to fit in the bathtub, I may take the opportunity before it dries to remove the sides, because they come off a good deal easier when the balsa is still wet. So next thing I'll do is usually for the motors, if they're brushless, is I want to dry those out and lubricate the bearings. So a brushless motor has 2 bearings on it. Here's just one, for example. So there's a bearing at either end. Well, it in general, yeah, a brushless motor is going to have 2 bearings. It's going to have a bearing at either end. It'll differ if it's an in-runner or an out-runner. These are out-runner motors, but similar concept applies for in-runner motors. So there's a bearing right there, and then there's one in the ends. And usually these motors will come with a ferrous bearing, so it'll just have steel, so they absolutely will rust, and that will be the first, generally, that'll be the first failure mechanism for the motor. So it's important to dry them out and minimize their time that's wet and make sure they're lubricated. So in this boat, I will I'll just, I'll pull the pumps out. I usually end up pumps, the way I have them, I can just kind of pull them out, and it's kind of like completely detached. So of course it's going to vary based on your setup, but I'll pull them out. I have these little shields. I'll remove the shields, and then I'll show kind of what I do with the pumps. Okay, for the pumps, first thing I'll do is, you see this one, it sort of has some debris from the pond, so I'll wipe that off with a paper towel. Okay, now that I've sort of removed the rough debris from the pump screen, I will give the pumps a bath in denatured alcohol. What this does is this stuff displaces water, and then it evaporates really easily. So by filling the pump with this, it will get rid of the water, and then it will evaporate to make sure it's dry. So I'll take it, I'll pour some into some sort of container that'll fit the pump, and then I'll just kind of submerge it like that, and I'll pour enough that I can at least get the pump housing where the impeller is, and then I'll just rotate it a few times to sort of make sure that it's sort of going throughout the inside. And then another thing I'll do is I will sometimes I'll pour some down the pump tube here, and then what that does, you can see there's kind of like some residual water in the tube, and that'll just help make sure that that water evaporates and doesn't kind of backflow into the pump. Once I'm done with the denatured alcohol, I will try to reuse as much as possible. You can see this stuff right here kind of has a yellowish tint and there's a bunch of particles in there. So what I'll do is I'll just use a coffee filter and then pour it into another container, and then that will filter out all the particles and preserve most of it, so then I can reuse it next time. Okay, so here's the results of pouring it through the coffee filter. You see in the coffee filter there's some particles, and then this is nice and clean, so I'll pour this back in the can and reuse it for next time. Okay, once I've dunked the pumps in denatured alcohol, I'll lubricate the bearings. I use this fluid film product, you can see there, and then I'll spray the top bearing there, which it's going to vary a bit based on the motor, and again with the in-runner you'd have to see how to do it, but I'll just kind of spray it in there. And then I just rotate it a few times to make sure you're getting the complete bearing. And then the challenge is going to be the lower bearing. So for my pumps, I drill a hole in the top of the case. You can see it in the webbing there. So what I'll do is I'll stick the tube of the lubricant on that hole and then spray it in to sort of fill up the cavity right where that bearing is, the pump end bearing. And then again I'll rotate the motor a few times to make sure the bearing has lubricant on it. Okay, I've sprayed both the pumps, rotated them. Another thing I'll note is, and I'll cover this more in a little bit, but it's good to sort of remember what what issues the boat had. So on this boat, one of these pumps was quite loud, so I'm going to preemptively replace the bearings on the pump. So I'll just show a comparison between the two. So this pump is, this one is still in good condition. When I rotate it right, you really can't hear it, and just compare it to this one. So you can hear that, that it's louder. When I run them, this one is a good bit louder. So because we really don't battle that often, it's just prudent, in my opinion, to if you notice that the bearing's failing, to go ahead and replace it before the next event. Now for the drive motors, that's a bit harder. There was a period of time where I would actually remove the drive motors, but that can kind of be a lot of work if you don't need to remove them otherwise. So what I'll do for those is I'll remove any coverings I have. So I'll remove the gearbox cover and the motor cover, and then you can see the pump can. You can see the moisture on there. So what I'll do is I'll just I'll use, sometimes I'll pour alcohol on them, but the fan's usually pretty good at getting them dry. So I'll just use the fluid film spray, and I can get both bearings here because it's exposed. Lighting's not that great, but the bearing is exposed, so I'll spray both of them, rotate the motor, and then use the fan to dry it out, and that's been effective in my experience. Okay, I've lubricated both the drive motors, so then I'll just set up a fan, sort of like that, or leave the boat outside, and then this will dry it off within, I don't know, an hour or so, and then I'll sort of cycle through. Once this is dry, then I'll dry some of the other parts of the boat. Another thing you can do is look to remove any pond gunk. So you can see that black spot right there, that black area. This is actually all debris from the pond that was under the pump. So always good to clean your pump screens, and I'll sort of remove. You can use like a shop vac or something. I think it's easier once the boat's dry, but it's good to get that gunk or any particles out of there. You can also use a magnet to get spent ammunition, to get BBs out. Just some sort of telescoping magnet, and then just get the BBs out of there. So that covers most of the, on the boat side, the sort of immediate actions, I guess, or immediate steps once I get back. There are several steps there, but it really takes probably only 10 minutes per boat to do. So it's worth it, in my opinion, for the longevity of the components. Now, if it's a boat with brushed motors, none of that motor maintenance really applies. You can certainly clear off the pumps, make sure there's nothing off with the motors, but no bearings to lubricate because they use bushings. Another thing that's important to do is to take care of the batteries. So there's different guidelines based on which battery chemistry is being used. Batteries that are currently in use, something like a NIM battery, I believe the guidance is to leave them charged. So for those, you just charge when you get back home. And then for lithium batteries, LiPos specifically, it's important to discharge them to a storage voltage. So I have a very simple jig here that I got, I think, on Amazon to help discharge batteries. There's also dischargers you can get, or chargers will usually have a discharge or storage function.
to reduce the voltage. When I just checked, it said between 3.8 and 2.85 volts per cell. So I'll just kind of cycle through the batteries. You know, this is like a cheap option. I think this little discharger with the light bulbs was pretty cheap, but depending, you know, I'm sure there's other products out there that can be used, but it's important. I'll try to do this immediately, and try to leave the batteries, especially any battery that I charged but I didn't use. I will try to discharge those as soon as possible to prolong the batteries, because the batteries absolutely will go bad within, you know, it could be a year, it could be 2 years, 3 years if they're not maintained properly. Another thing I'll do with the batteries when I do charge them is I'll check how much capacity was consumed. The reason to do that is to see if, you know, how the capacity that you run in the boat, how it meets the boat's needs. So whether you have too much capacity and you can get away with fewer batteries, or if you're discharging batteries significantly, then maybe you need to consider swapping them out between sorties, or using more batteries, or using higher capacity batteries. I'll usually shoot to discharge the batteries really no more than like 75% of their capacity, because the capacity, the written capacity on the batteries will degrade over time, as the electrodes inside sort of degrade over time. So if you size them to really, you know, if in this case it's a 6,000 milliamp hour battery, if my boat consumed, you know, 5,500 or, you know, close to 6,000 every battle, then as soon as that battery loses some capacity, then I'm going to be in trouble, and components could die, which is never fun, to have them die mid-battle. So, especially for a new boat, like I ran a new boat this weekend, batteries that I've used slightly, I may still charge and just see what they used, and then immediately discharge them, so I get the data for how much capacity was used by the boat, and I'll write that down, and then I'll discharge them. If the batteries have been fairly discharged from use, a lot of times you really won't need to discharge them significantly, because they may already be close to that storage voltage. So all depends, but it's certainly something with lipos that I try to do immediately, just to prolong the life, because batteries are certainly one of the most expensive components, and especially they're a component that does and can go bad and make you replace them, which can be frustrating. Okay, the last thing I'll really talk about is not really something that needs to be done immediately, though I do like to do it as soon as possible after battle, and that is making a list of potential improvement areas for the boat. That's something I learned when I first got in the hobby over 20 years ago, is that really, no matter how experienced you are, when you first make a boat, there's probably going to be things that can be done better, things that weren't as reliable as you thought, or things that didn't perform the way you intend. And I like to make the list right after the battle, because that's when it's freshest in my memory. And if I don't write it down, there will absolutely be things that at a later battle will come up, and then I'll remember as soon as it happens again at a later battle that, oh yeah, I meant to fix that in a previous event, but because I didn't write it down, especially smaller things, I'll sort of regret not doing it. So it really depends. It's going to vary boat to boat, experience to experience. You may have seen another captain build their boat a different way, and then decide that may be a really good option for your boat. So things to consider is how will the guns work. So on this boat, Missouri, the aft guns, they worked great, really no complaints, but the forward guns were sort of intermittent. So maybe I'm going to look at maybe the hoses were getting pinched.
Maybe the regulator was icing up because it was a very moist battle this past weekend. So I'll take a look at that. Maybe the gun wasn't firing consistently, so maybe I need to disassemble that and make sure the piston's set height, or make sure there's enough clearance for the piston to move. I'll think about stability, like did the boat sink with both pumps going full tilts? Did the boat sink level? Did I have pump issues where a pump wasn't priming well, so it wasn't really performing at what the capacity that it could perform at? How was the drive system? Was the boat sluggish? Did the boat maneuver well? Was the rudder servo glitchy? There's really sort of infinite possibilities that could apply. And again, I like to just write it down right after battle, because that's when it's freshest in your memory. That's if you don't write it down then the big things I'll usually remember if I come back to it, but the small things can definitely slip through the cracks. And then this boat, Missouri, I think I built it in 2017. It's now 2024. I haven't battled it every year, but I've battled it at least once most years in several nationals, and it's gone through several almost complete rebuilds. So making changes, making incremental improvements is definitely not foreign. If something isn't right, I wouldn't be discouraged. I just see it as an opportunity to build on the things that did work right and then correct the things that didn't. So this is the sort of main things that I'll do post-battle. Another thing that I will do sometimes is in terms of patching damage. Sometimes it's nice to get the boat patched and have it just be set, ready to go for the next event. In some situations, if you don't know how much time you're going to have, that's a great option. Other times, especially if the boat had stability issues or wasn't great, and I want to make some improvements and retest it, in those cases it's best to retest with battle damage. So instead of having to poke holes in the boat afterwards, I'll just not patch it, and then I can make a water channeling change, I can make a pump change, I can make a weight distribution change, and then I can bring the boat to a pond and more accurately simulate battle. Because if you patch it all up and there's no damage, you really, you can see how it performs without damage, but that represents only a very small portion of how the boat will be driven in a battle situation. So a lot of times I will leave, especially if it's a boat that I wasn't quite happy with the stability, I'll leave it unpatched, or if it really got pounded and sank, so I'd be afraid of it sinking again, I'll patch some big holes, but I'll leave enough to keep a healthy flow of water to the pumps when I'm retesting it later. And then a lot of times I will try to, those small things or the improvements, especially if it's small, I will try to knock it out as one of my first priorities before moving on to another project, because it is good in my view to try to take the boat, make it better, and then get it set. So if life gets in the way or you don't have time to get it ready for the next event, it's always good to be able to know you have a boat that you can just pull off the shelf and take to an event and have it work reliably well. So those are the considerations and the set of activities that I'll do right after an event, ideally right when I get home, because it really doesn't take a whole lot of time, but if not, then maybe within the next day or two, to really prolong the longevity of the boat and make incremental improvements to
have even more fun at the next event. Hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching.